Hi there, MP3U fans and followers. This is Phil coming to you again from Tokyo, Japan with another artist interview. It's a scorching hot day here in Tokyo. It feels like 48 degrees Celsius. That's a whopping 118 Fahrenheit. Whew. Anyway, I caught up with Dave Meredith. He's a prolific and extremely talented musician from England.
Hello and good afternoon to you, Phil. First off, I'd like to say thank you very much for asking me to be interviewed for an artist at MP3 Unsigned. I mean, it was a pleasure when you asked me, to be honest.
The pleasure's all mine.
It's a website that always stands out for me, mainly because of the community, also the collection of music, and I've met a lot of friends there, and quite a few that I've gone on to work with in music, which has been fantastic. And there's always a good atmosphere amongst a select bunch of people who wanted more than just uploading music. He wanted to communicate and pass ideas, and I've loads of collaborations via that website in particular. And so it always holds a sort of special place for me because of that and the people I've met. As you've mentioned previously, I've worked with various guys and girls off of the website, from vocal collabs to added musical arrangements into my own work, and it's been fantastic. So yeah, that was a major pleasure for me, and it's been fantastic to meet and work with the people. I always remember when I first signed up, and I thought I was just starting to reach a stage where I was getting better at what I was doing and improving equipment as I went along. And it struck me when I got there how good the particular bunch of artists were, and not just the music they were given, it was the quality of the recordings and the sound quality overall. Excuse me, especially the electronic, and being more my thing because it's what I'm set up for. Some of the quality of the overall sound was on a different level to what I was doing at the time, because I was still, I think, recording via auxiliary, so you were losing a lot of the stereo separation and things, which I had to implement via software afterwards, which became quite a tricky and long process, and sometimes you just couldn't reach that. So it was only later on when I moved on to real-time MIDI that things improved and I could reach those levels. But it was only hearing these things that made it drove me on to try and perform better and get a better quality overall.
I've known you as a musician for quite a long time, but I don't really know much about your musical background. Could you tell us a little bit about how you got interested in music?
Yeah, that's a good question, Phil, about how it all started for me and the music itself. It's an interesting one. I was very young. I was about 8 years old. May have been I think it's 8. I was 7, 8. It was that sort of age. And my parents had bought me a keyboard. It wasn't nothing expensive. I don't come from a rich background. It was it's a standard keyboard, and it was there for me at Christmas. I think I'd already sneaked to look at it. I found it under my mum and dad's bed. But as you are when you're kids, it's all sort of fun now. But I'm sure they wouldn't have been too happy if they known I've been snooping around. But and it was given to me Christmas Day, and I remember having some time getting used to it and just playing. I didn't know anything about how it worked. I was just playing and playing, and as time went by, I'd find myself sometimes 2-3 hours just playing. And mainly I was on the sharps, on the black keys to start with. I didn't have a clue, and I was just practicing playing. And as I aged, I think a few years later, probably 5 years maybe later, 4 or 5 years later, I had another keyboard for a Christmas present. And this time, this particular keyboard could record up to 6 tracks in memory. So I started to experiment with obviously having one layer, and then there might have been a basic piano layer or something, and then putting some strings over the top and starting to form tracks. And this was just part of the process of learning by ear, I guess. And I was always also a big fan of retro, well, it was now seen as retro music, but in the day when I was sort of in the late 80s, mid 80s and early 90s and stuff, for the soundtracks in video games, like from the Commodore 64, Commodore Amiga, and the C64 had its fantastic SID sound chip, as it was known as, and some of the musicians from that era were incredible on these systems when it's programmed chip music, and it was the melodies used to fascinate me. I always had an interest in those melodies, and it used to always just capture me, and I'd pick things out. I think that just sounds brilliant. Most people wouldn't give it the time of day, but I just spotted things in these, and I love these soundtracks. And to this day, and it's a testament to myself, I've been on a couple of albums with some of my all-time favourite people like Chris Hülsbeck, a German award-winning composer who's originated from that era, and he's still composing music now. And I'm in small contact with the guy from time to time, and bless him, he's even bought 3 of my albums off Bandcamp, which I was fascinated by, because he could have went down the Spotify route and I would have earned no money at all. And he said, no, I like to, if you could put them on Bandcamp, and I'll buy them from there, because the artists get a huge amount of the purchase price, and you wanted to help out another artist. And I thought that was fascinating, because the guy is almost a musical genius. He probably is a musical genius. I've not met him in person, but his work speaks for itself over many years. And I've met many others from that time period, and who I've grown sort of what I'd call distant friendships with, because I don't know these guys in person as such, but they're there, and they've given me opinions of my albums once or twice. And these are people I looked up to when I was a teenager, because their own work used to blow me away when I used to be playing old video games, and some of the soundtracks were just staggering, and what they did with this. And unfortunately now there's nothing wrong with the soundtracks now, but it's very much a field of how would you put it, studio recordings, and it all sounds very, very highly polished, but very, very similar, because it's all of a similar routine. Whereas in the era I grew up in, there was more melody, and everybody had an individual sound, so you had a bigger distinction between the guys and the girls doing this. And this is what fascinated me, and it grew from there. I had some of my favourite artists, as I said, with Chris Hülsbeck, Nobuo Uematsu, who's responsible for all the Final Fantasy soundtracks and more, but those are the ones he will be mostly remembered for and known for. And this is another guy who was self-taught as well, and fantastic Japanese orchestral musician, absolutely fantastic. And there's many more, absolutely many more that I've got on my list, and they're all people would probably be surprised to hear, because most people won't have heard of them. But these are spectacular and very impressive musicians in their own right. And Yuzo Koshiro is another one with some of his fantastic work. And Mitsuda Yoshinari, I think my pronunciation may be terrible, so I hope he's not seen this video, is another one. All these people, these stand out they just have a quality. And and this is what inspired me. This is where a lot of my ideas came from, and in that era of playing the games had distinguished soundtracks, and that's what really got me into soundtracks. Although predominantly it was hip hop beats and stuff like that originally, and and a lot of vocal collabs. But as things change, you go back to your old roots, I guess.
You have said that you learned to play by ear and are self-taught. I just find it incredible that someone with no formal training could have such mastery of musical composition. Did you study any musical instruments at school or learn basic music theory before exploring it more?
Yeah, Phil, that's another good question, really. It's tricky to explain, because I was never taught by anybody music. I was never shown any direction, no help in any way. I did no schooling of that sort. It was just, like I mentioned in one of the other video clips, it was more of a case of just practice, listen. Many years of listening to soundtracks and placement, and structuring was the main thing, I think. Structuring, and what I felt sounded right through my ears as I was playing started to become melodies. And I did used to listen a lot to soundtrack music of the early era of video games and things like that, a lot of listening. And I used to even make little cassette tapes of some of my favourites that I would just listen to on a Walkman, an old Sony Walkman, tape Walkman. Shows an age a bit there, doesn't it? But yeah, I used to listen for sometimes ages. I'd go to bed, time to go to bed at night, ready for school the next morning. I'd have an hour of headphones on the Walkman, listening to one of the soundtracks. And I guess this just becomes kind of programmed into your mind a bit. And then you start to, when you do play with synths and keyboards and electronic equipment, you start to realise, you start making things and you start feeling progress. I guess it just developed that way. Whether there's something naturally just in my DNA, I do not know. I mean, I know my dad was, obviously way before I was born, was a musician. He was a singer and a guitar player in a band. And so maybe there's something that I've just picked up from those lines. But yeah, there's no teaching involved of any type of form, really. And if anything, the teaching has been by listening to other people and other people's music, whether that's, like I said, retro, what we class as retro soundtracks now, and all the way to artists and independent artists like myself from MP3, you know, just listening to people's work and hearing the quality and the sounds and turning it into what I see as music and how I see it for me. So yeah, that's probably the best way to answer that, Phil.
You have built up a vast and impressive repertoire of music, including several albums. One of my personal favorites is Illusions. It includes collaborations with at least 3 MP3U artists. I think there's 1 track with Matt Avello, 3 with Malcolm Gales, 3 with Joseph Rodriguez. Could you tell us a little bit more about that album and how it's been received so far?
Yes, Phil, the album Illusions, which was one of my first, I think, if not the first soundtrack CD I put together. The idea being originally to be a 1 CD and it ended up being 2, and it was soundtrack based was the whole idea, and also to involve collaborations with people I'd met through websites, but mainly it was MP3 Unsigned, where most of the musicians and people I'd met who collaborated on this album with me. I mean, there was, like I say, it was Joe Rodriguez, who brilliantly added guitar to some tracks, and ever so grateful for the time and effort he put in, and Martin Etheridge, and obviously KTA at the time. You know, he lended a couple of tracks, and Malcolm Gales as well, also involved in a couple of collabs with myself, and he just brought a new dynamics. And not forgetting Peter Vines too, you know, he added orchestration to one of the tracks on there, and it was fantastic.
Of course, Peter Vines, yes, he's another major figure in MP3U, an amazing musician. I personally love visual artwork as well as audio, and I really love the cover of Illusions. It's deceptively simple, but it's actually quite detailed in terms of texture, light and shade. I'm just wondering, who did the artwork? Was that you?
You mentioned the artwork, Phil, and Peter himself did the artwork. Peter Vines was, you know, responsible for the artwork for that particular album, which I was very grateful for. It was very kind of him to, you know, to offer to do that, and I ended up with some lovely artwork for that. And it's one of my favourite albums, because it was, I think, the first time I'd really got to grips with the full-on recording in real-time MIDI and using, you know, different software and experimenting more with the sound quality to get a good, strong sound. And I think that was one of the first steps where I actually felt myself making some quite large progress. And I think that's why it ended up being CD1 was electronic music and CD2 obviously still electronic, but it was orchestrated. So it was based on more orchestral instruments to try and give a balance. I didn't want to have one album and just one CD split between electronic and orchestra, because I think it can be a bit jarring for the listener. I think with that track suddenly quite energetic and fast, and the next one's quite slow and sort of mythical and different. It's like, you know, it's a bit of an imbalance. So that's why I ended up separating to 2.